Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion. You can comment on the live stream, and we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, welcome back to another episode of Between the Before and After. Lindsay, for me, is a very familiar guest because I've already interviewed her, I think twice at least, and I've been a guest on her podcast as well. But I thought, she has such wisdom to share that it'd be valuable to bring her back to this and tell a little bit more of the backstory behind the stress nanny and how you became that and what it is that you do. So I'm going to toss it over and let you give people a little bit of a backstory into what you're presently doing, and then we'll explore that story and how you got there.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, John. It's always fun to talk to you. So I was flattered to be able to come and connect with you on this podcast. I am the stress nanny, Lindsay Miller. I have a podcast and a platform where I help parents. I teach parents how to help kids deal with anxiety, anger, fear, and stress. So that's pretty prevalent right now, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of need for, tools for families to teach resilience in really simple ways.
Yeah. So how did you get to this place where this is what you do? Because I imagine maybe growing up, did you have this idea that when I grow up, I want to be a stress nanny?
No, there was actually a time though, there were a few little snippets. And I think sometimes life works like this, right? Where we get little hints or whispers about what's ahead for us. And we could just kind of tuck them away. And we're not exactly sure what it means or where it's going to go, but we just kind of hold on to it. And when I was in college, I was like, I want to study child development. I want to study family science because I feel like that's the place where like the highest impact work happens, is in family life and in child development because those years are so formative. And I was fascinated by all things child development, the cognitive, the emotional, social, all those aspects of it. And so I just had this passion for learning about how optimal development works throughout the lifespan, right? So then fast forward a few years and my husband and I are living in San Antonio, Texas. It's just the two of us. He's got his first job out of college and I'm just kind of trying to figure out what I want to do. If I want to go to grad school, if I want to, be just kind of at home until we have kids, what's going to be the plan for me? And I had this idea of like, I want to do more. I want to take some sort of like counseling route or something along those lines, but I don't want it to be that formal. Like I wanted it to be in people's homes, I wanted it to just be like more of a everyday casual setting where it didn't feel like I was the expert. You're coming to me to help you fix something or solve something, but that you were like, I could just support you in the ways you need support, offer you the resources you needed along your way.
Kind of like knocking down the barriers. So, because it can feel kind of intimidating to walk into an office and someone in a professional setting and maybe in a big professional building or something like that. And there's obviously a place and a value in something like that, but it can definitely raise sort of some obstacles and barriers, maybe inadvertently for people like wanting to learn. And so by choosing this path, I think that's really, really, that was a lot of excellent foresight on your part.
It was funny because at the time it didn't exist, I didn't know about coaching. I didn't really understand. And so I just kind of held on to that. Later on, I did go back to graduate school. I took some classes in counseling and I had at that point gone through infertility and, had my daughter using in vitro and my husband and I navigated those waters like marriage struggles, having to like relate during a time when you can't have kids and you really want to is really hard.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so the stress from that was significant. And then I'd also had my body kind of fall apart after we tried in vitro a second time. And that's when I kind of had my Hashimotos swirl where I just had like rampant inflammation. I was having really chronic joint pain. My Hashimoto's, like I said, was flaring in all the ways, like energy,
Mm. Yeah.
fatigued all the time. My digestion was off. And I kind of like worked back up to a level of functionality. And that's when I went to graduate school and I was like, okay, it's time to just like get on with life. And I'm not going to say someday I'm going to, because it became really clear to me, like a lot of your guests after moments like that, where you're like, I can't pick up my kid right now. I don't actually know
Yeah.
if I'll ever like be able to run again because my joint
Right.
so sore. I just was having the hardest time turning my head. And so
Yeah. Oof. Boy. Yeah.
I had done so many things during that stretch anyway. So I went to the graduate classes, took several, and then was in a class one day and said to myself, like, this is not how I want to help people. Like, there has to be more of a body component and a like self-awareness component. And so I finished that class up and then just kind of kept looking. I did yoga certifications, health coaching certifications, and then mindfulness came along. And I was,
Yeah.
this is what I've been practicing my whole life. And it's helped me get through all these things. And what would it have been like if I'd had these tools when I was little? And then I said to myself,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. Like, we have to teach these tools when kids are tiny so they can build from a place of resilience. So, when those moments come, which they inevitably will, that we'll be able to give them, like just optimal ability to cope and navigate and grow in whatever ways they can through the struggles, instead of having them serve as like a hurdle to their development. So here we are now where I'm coaching kids on Zoom, like they're in their homes. It's more
Yeah.
simple. I'm using these tools. I'm getting to apply child development, every day as I'm working with kids and kind of figuring out where their developmental hurdles are and how mindfulness can help. And so I didn't really see the thing out there that I wanted to do. So I kind of created it, right?
Yeah.
Kids mindfulness coaching. Here it is. It's here now.
Which is amazing. You mentioned that you have a passion for like optimal development and a desire to create impact. Where do you think that came from? Like, I'm curious, how does that awaken people, or, what experiences might you have had leading up to that point in your life where you go, I want to do something that creates impact, and I have this idea that working with kids is going to be the way that I can create an impact. And maybe why is it you would like to create that impact?
Yeah, those are great questions. I am the oldest of four. Like, I have four sisters. So I'm the oldest of five girls. And so I've always been like a little bit of a mother hen, where like I'm kind of just taking care of them, looking out for them, kind of watching to see what I can do to help guide them. That was my job when I was little, to be the example and the helper. And so throughout their lives, like, they've come to me like, hey, Lindsay, I need help with this.
That's all right. We do this live.
Lindsay, I need help with this, or I can't figure out this. Can you help me? And then over time, it's the UPS guy just dropping us something.
Oh, there you go.
Over time, I was able to figure out different ways to listen. In college, I was a resident assistant, and I just had a desire to like use the skills and gifts that I've had and like let them channel through me. So like that they don't stop here, right? Like they channel through me into whatever settings I'm in, supporting the people that I'm with, and giving me the opportunity to just kind of be, like, let stuff flow through me. Cause I've been gifted with so many like supportive people in my life, so many great opportunities. And I think a lot of times we get to a point in life where we feel like, wow, there's so much abundance around me. Like there have been so many things that have come my way that I feel so much gratitude for. And instead of just kind of feeling a sense of like hanging on to them, when you get to that place of abundance, right, you want to let them flow.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting way to describe it. So when you were at, was it a graduate school where you said, this is not how I want to work with people or help people? Yeah. What were you seeing that you said, okay, this isn't what I want, or this isn't how I want to help people? What sort of obstacles or problems did you see with that?
Yeah. And let's be clear at first, like I have gone to counseling so often in my life, like it's part of my wellness routine. So I am a big fan of mental health support. But it just wasn't the right fit for me. And we were doing this activity in a group. And I remember we were standing in a circle and it was all cerebral. which is funny because I teach mindfulness, right? But
Yeah.
it was just totally cerebral, and there was no body awareness as part of it. And, you know, and
Right.
I
Kind of.
go ahead.
I was going to say like somatic, well,
Mhm.
and on the top of my brain is like somatic experiencing. I actually have a session this afternoon
Yeah.
for myself for somatic experiencing, but the term somatic, I think referencing like what we sense in our physical body. And there really wasn't a reference to that. It was all dealing with, this is what's happening in your brain presently. And so there was kind of a disconnect or.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm,
and I was really present with what was going on with me right then, right? Because I'd had my yoga practice, like meditation had been serving
mm.
me for a while. So I was really present with like this antsiness that I kind of felt. And with like there was a little bit of like an anxious feeling, but we were talking, I think we were talking about anxiety or something, or we were supposed to be talking about how we were feeling. And I was like, no, I need to move. Like I don't need to just talk through this right now. Like I need to be moving right now. And that's where
Right.
I wanted the flexibility to incorporate, and I know that there are amazing mental health professionals who incorporate yoga, who incorporate
Right.
somatic
Right.
experience. So it's not that they're mutually exclusive, but it just wasn't the foundation I wanted to build on. I wanted it to be a little bit more active, a little bit more fluid, and incorporate that body awareness like as part of the framework instead of as an add-on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. And I think I think it's an innovative and very necessary step looking forward. And I think maybe you will have even, from the time that you started doing this, you'll have seen like the evolution of sort of like mental health and counseling, where we are recognizing
Yeah.
we cannot ignore the connection between like brain and body, between mind and spirit, if we want to put it that way. Just there is something there. And when we try to, I think one of the maybe specialization has its value, but one of the drawbacks of specialization is we start to see things as discrete units, separate units, as opposed to interconnected pieces. And, I have this picture of just a connect the dots drawing, and you're just connecting the dots with a person. And rather than circling one individual dot and trying to fix that one dot, it's like, well, how do we connect all of these? And so you are looking for a way to do that. And that actually makes you quite innovative in this space of health. And so I appreciate that. Now I wonder if we could, there's a couple of things in your personal story I'd like to dive into a little bit, depending on what you're comfortable sharing. But I think there's some real value to be gleaned from this, just in terms of how you navigated this. So
Yeah.
you mentioned, like you went through some fertility struggles,
Yeah.
and inevitably there's a lot of, I mean, I'm a recent father. I got a 13-month-old, and it's the most incredible thing. But like we waited a number of years before that was really a possibility for us, and so. But that inevitably probably brings some degree of tension or disappointment or discouragement into this relationship that you had. And how did you navigate that? What sort of struggles did you run into, and how did you navigate that? Because there might be people listening who are like going through this right now and going, I feel so alone. I feel ashamed that this is happening to me, or I feel ashamed that this is causing some sort of marital discord or struggle and so on. When it's like, this is just a very human experience. So if you don't mind sharing what you're comfortable with, I think it'd be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm always happy to talk about infertility. And I feel like now there's a lot more openness than there was even,
Mhm.
like 14 years ago when we
Yeah.
were navigating it, which I love. I love seeing people more comfortable talking about it. And I'm always happy to share my story in the hopes that if it provides someone else a little bit of support or camaraderie along the way, like I see you, I hear you.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hard, So yeah. So my husband and I got married. We were in our early 20s, and we waited a little bit, and we're like, okay, I think we're ready to start having kids. Like my sister had a baby, and she was the most adorable thing we'd ever seen. And I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
gosh,
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I want one of those.
I know. I was like, okay, I think we could have one of these. It would be amazing. So
Yeah.
I didn't think anything of it. Again, like I'm the oldest of 5 kids. My parents, didn't have any trouble, obviously. And so
Mhm.
I we started trying to have kids, and it was like, okay, we're just trying. It's fine. It sometimes takes people a while, and then it went longer and longer. And 6 months, I started to be like maybe I don't have all the information I need for this, maybe
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
maybe I'm missing something here.
But if we
I
go back to
hear-
like 14,
Go ahead.
15 years ago, like the internet isn't quite as, I mean,
No.
obviously it's fairly advanced, but like the leaps that we've made now in terms of
Yeah.
information and connectivity and understanding, like it just wasn't really that accessible back then.
Yeah, for sure. And it was mostly like email was the
Right.
primary mode of, communication. And there were some websites or blogs, but it was mostly blogs. It wasn't nearly as, we weren't as nearly resource rich as we are today.
Yeah.
So I check out books from the library. By this time I've working full time. I've graduated, working full time. My husband's still finishing up, and I'm, starting to think maybe we need some help. So I talked to my family practice guy, like, not sure yet if I want to kind of engage with this, right? Because I've
Right.
had it. I've had that dance with infertility, for 20 years where I'm like, maybe I want it. No, I don't know. Maybe, maybe I could use some help. No, it's probably fine. And so I just kind of broached it with him on my annual physical, and I was like, hey, we're kind of trying, and I don't know, if we need a little bit, if we're not doing something right, or
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Because it's
so
not something we commonly talk about.
yeah. And to be honest, like there's a lot about pregnancy prevention, but when you're actually like, okay, wait, I actually am trying to make this happen,
Right.
at the time too, it was just kind of like everyone, it seems so easy. I'm watching person after person during this time.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh, we're pregnant. Oh, I'm so surprised. Oh, I didn't even, and I'm like, I must be doing this wrong. Like
Right. And isn't that interesting? Because my mind goes to the reticular activating system filtering. So because like in your brain, like this is something you desire, like with all of your being. And so now that reticular activating system, that's our brain's filter that says, and you pick up on all these other things, and we filter out all the other information. And so that can sometimes maybe add to a little bit of the emotional duress that you might be experiencing in this.
I love that you pointed that out. Yeah, totally. It was like I had a radar, and I was like invited to every baby shower and every, like it was
Right. And I mean, does that ever come up in conversation? Like you're invited to like these baby showers and things, and inside you're kind of feeling a little bit of, or maybe a lot. I shouldn't maybe diminish your experience. Maybe you're feeling a lot of distress in this because on the one hand, you're feeling happy for these people and what they're celebrating and this beautiful miracle that's happening. On the same token, it's something that you want that isn't happening for you. And so, and maybe there's a bit of guilt in there too, because you're like, well, I want to be happy for these people, but I feel distressed and I shouldn't feel this. Or, was there kind of this emotional turmoil happening with you?
completely 100%. And that was before I learned that I could feel two things at once. It would be
Right.
probably like 3 years later that I would finally go avail myself of some counseling so that I could, understand that it's okay if you feel happy for this person and completely devastated for yourself, all
Yes.
while you're sitting at the party drinking punch. Like
Right.
that's
Yeah. Is it a bit of, I want to use the term dialectical, but I think dialectical is more the ability to hold two thoughts at the same time. But is there a term that refers to the emotional ability as well?
I mean, not that I can think. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of differentiation there. I think it is just like the practice of believing that you can, and
Yeah.
not beating yourself up. Because I was feeling a lot of guilt around being upset. Like, why am I
Yeah.
sad? Why
Mhm,
am I
mhm.
sad right now? What's wrong with me? What? And there was just so much like
Yeah.
internal flipping it, like that there was something wrong again and again and again. And then adding on top of that, we have male factor infertility. So that means
Okay.
that our sperm are a little bit lazy swimmers. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so I obviously don't have sperm. And so this was not something that I even had a lot of control over, but most people assume when you say you're navigating infertility that it's the
Mm.
woman who's
Right. Right.
struggling. And
Right.
so during that time, and as you can imagine for my husband, he's a young 20 something. He's like, it's mortifying for him,
Right.
right? I mean,
Yep.
he's like, wait, what? I don't. And so we like did our first test and we were trying to figure out what was going on. And he was like, this can't be true. This can't be right. And I'm like,
Right.
Okay. I mean, I uh, I've done every other test. I mean, there are
Yeah.
no other tests I can do, and
Yeah.
so instead so that was one of the challenges we had relationally is it was a good 3 years, John,
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
he was like ready to pursue any kind of treatment that involved him. So in the
Right.
meantime, all I'm left with is like, well, maybe I can try this, or I try harder, or I take my temperature
Right.
better, or I, like
Yeah.
trying
Yeah.
everything in my power to try to make it happen. And so it compounded that emotional and
Yes. Yeah.
physical component, right? Of like, this is something I can do. Like something must be wrong with me. I'm somehow flawed that I can't figure this out or make him go in or, whatever it is. It
Yeah.
felt
Yeah.
heavy at the time.
Yeah. No kidding. And it sort of probably drives maybe a little bit of a wedge unintentionally, where
Sure.
you know, like any kind of intimacy or physical interaction, like has this sort of hanging over it. And
Yep.
so and how do you kind of, because obviously, like, you're still together. Could we say there's a success story here, but you didn't get there the easy road,
Yeah.
and it's a really in my mind, like, especially being male, like, it's really interesting sort of picturing or imagining his journey from this place of like, this can't be true. I'm moving into the place of denial because I've really the reality. It was kind of acknowledging the present reality is too uncomfortable for me, so I'd rather move into this place of denial and shift the burden over to you.
Yeah.
And then you sort of taking that on board and having to sort of be patient with him. And I guess why I'm shining a light on this is because I went through something not exactly the same, but with my mental health, where like I was really, almost trying to push my wife away in my struggle, and it was I was in a bad place mentally, and so there was nothing physical. It was just, but I was just saying, you don't want me in your life, kind of thing. You'll be happier without me there, and this kind of thing. It was very distressing, but she was very well, she's stubborn. and we're 17 years, we're still together. So he had to navigate this, and you kind of had to navigate this too, and almost give him space to kind of experience this, while in the same token, like metabolizing all these different emotions that you're feeling, this distress you feel in the moment. And you're like, I kind of have to almost like hold space for him too. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's very astute. Yep. That's exactly how it went down. And I think, what you described for you in terms of anger and kind of pushing away, that was what I was experiencing too. Like, I would bring it up and he was like, we are always talking about this. Can we please talk about something else? And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I wasn't working at the time because
Yeah.
in part because when you're doing all those tests, it's so hard, right? Because they're time sensitive and you have to go in on certain days, at certain hours, when you're doing injections, it's like all of it just has to orchestrate so specifically that I was like, I'm going to take a break from being in the workforce right now as we're kind of sorting this out. But the result of that was that I was kind of just waiting around for it to happen and kind of waiting for him to come around. And our pace was so slow. And I'm a person who likes to kind of get things done, like
Right. Yeah.
if we're not going to do this, like I should go do something else because
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
sitting around wasting my time. And I did like volunteer work and I found other ways to make meaning. And that was, enter the psychology at that point, because my anxiety was hitting like epic levels and I was kind of getting panicky. Right. My body was telling me I was not okay, even though if you talk to me, I was telling you I was fine. Right.
Right. Right. Because even that is an uncomfortable conversation where a lot of people, I mean, it's come a very long way again, but still to try to explain to somebody, like, I'm not really okay in this moment, but sharing this with you doesn't mean that you are responsible for trying to fix me. And very often we do that to alleviate the discomfort we feel. Like, if you were to say to me, like, I'm not okay in this moment, and I was to go, you'll be just fine. Everything's going to be okay. That's really me saying I'm not comfortable with like where you're at in this moment. So I'm going to try and shut this down instead of just being present with you and saying like, hey, this is a part of being human, experiencing these distressing emotions. I can't take them away, but at least I can be present so you don't feel alone in this experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you pointed that out because I think, it was key. That happened to me a lot where there weren't a lot of people who could hold space. And then because of my husband's, bless his heart, his reticence to talk about it, he didn't want me to talk about it. So he
Yeah.
asked me not to talk about it with other people, which at the time, I realized later on, I was like, okay, what I did was say, I need to talk about this. Who do you feel safe with, me disclosing this information to? But it was years. I kept it and held it, and I was holding space for him, for me, for everything without any outlet. And it wasn't very healthy, for any aspect of me.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it felt like I didn't know what else to do. Like, here's this guy I love dearly. I can understand he's struggling. I can totally appreciate how devastating this is for him. And also the toll it started to take on me got to be just like more than what I could manage.
yeah, it just feels like, a heavier and heavier weight. And really, I mean, kudos to your husband, because I think what's really cool, like, this is why I like to explore these stories, because you get to this place, like there's this struggle and this arc, where you get to, like this really brilliant place. And so, but you're trying to Yeah, hold space for him, hold space for yourself. Anxiety is kind of peaking here. And I wonder if there was like another part of the struggle because you're educated in this field that maybe sometimes there's also the temptation to try to go back into the analytical part of your brain. Let me see if I can solve this puzzle, escape from it and figure it out like cerebrally.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And I still will do that. Like, I think you called me out on that on our podcast. Is you're like, that seems like you're intellectualizing that emotion a little. I'm like, yeah, I routinely use that as a
Yeah, yeah.
as a way to cope. But no, I definitely felt like I knew enough to feel like I should know what to do.
Yeah.
Like I should be
Yeah.
able to get through this. I should be able to handle it. And at the time too, like faith has always been like a strong part of my life.
Mhm.
And I
Yes.
felt like if I was just more faithful, if I just
Mhm.
prayed
Yes.
a little hard, and eventually my scientific mind caught up with all of that and helped me understand that, there were some key physical components that uh,
Yeah.
needed,
Yeah.
needed to be addressed in this, and that I needed to take a more interdisciplinary approach, like a scientific, spiritual, and mental approach to this,
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it was hard to navigate those years, and we still talk
Mhm.
about um how hard that was because he was super angry. I was kind of upset, devastated, and
Yeah.
frazzled, and so we were just trying to like meet somewhere in all
Somewhere
the
in the middle. Yeah.
awkward
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, but isn't that interesting? Because I think let's say when you got married, and I'm like, I think back to when I got married. You have this idea like this is how my life is going to go. Like this is great. I'm just none of us really look at it and go like, oh boy, I can't wait to hit like the first major roadblock and then hit and then like careen totally off the road and end up in a ditch on an entirely different road and like but that's really how life goes. And so what's interesting is it kind of highlights the gap between maybe the expectations we're sort of, because you mentioned the word resilience, and I think about the expectations which sometimes we're saddled with. This is how your life is supposed to go because we make it very you centric or very me centric. You're a special person. Like, hey, my son is the most beautiful little boy in the world in my eyes. Like he's the most precious human being on this planet. But like he's one of 8 billion. Like to have this idea that, well, because I have such deep emotion for him, that I saddle him with this expectation that your life is going to be amazing, you're going to everything you ever want, and so on. Well, that's really setting him up for a massive amount of disappointment when the real life, if I was to go that route. And so sometimes we grapple with the gap between our expectation of how life is supposed to go versus the reality. Maybe that's part of where some of this internal turmoil comes from, is this isn't how I saw my life going. Why am I going down this path?
For sure, 100%. Yeah, and that's so insightful too, because, he's the youngest of 6 kids. I'm the
Okay.
oldest of 5. So we were always like, "We're just gonna have a whole bunch of cute little kids."
Right.
And
Yeah.
we have 1. And
Yeah.
so that it is a completely different life journey. I mean, it's exactly what you said. Our car, like, careened off the path and then found a new different one, and we love the one we're on. It's
Yeah.
incredible, and
Yeah.
but it took a really long time to get okay with not being on that first path, a
Yeah.
really long time.
Yeah, and you mentioned faith as a part of it. I think it's a valuable component to it, even for those who are listening who might be have a faith, because again, I wonder if sometimes within those who are like I'm a Christian. I don't necessarily like make it public. I don't wear it on my sleeve, but it is a faith that I practice. But I believe also sometimes there's this expectation that because I belong to this faith or I'm practicing this, that that the blessings of God or something mean that I'm going to have the most perfect life. And it's like, no, actually, it means you're going to go on a path of struggle. But I think where faith helps, or at least has helped me in my struggles, is in that struggle, there's a work being accomplished. So something is like I'm going through this that I wouldn't choose, but because I have help, or I look to a higher power for help, that in this struggle, I'm going to be changed in a better way and come out the other side of it in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do by myself, except that I went through this experience.
Yeah, 100%. I think the hope that faith imbued me with during that time was critical to, like, the future trajectory of growth, because I think I could have, not had that outlook, but,
Mhm,
like,
mhm.
talking about the reticular activating system, like, how is this serving me? How am I growing as a result of this? And one thing I said to myself so often during all those years, like the infertility, the Hashimotos, any struggle really, I conditioned myself to say, like, who am I going to be able to help as a result of this? Like, how can this not
Right.
be useful down the road? And it's good that I'm helping myself right?
Mhm.
But like you said, I'm a human. There are other humans who navigate hard things. And like if I can build resilience in this moment, maybe there's another human who I can walk alongside them, even if I'm just holding space for this like hard experience they're having. When I'm like probing the depths of my own humanity, I make it easier, I think, for other humans to do the same.
Absolutely. And yeah, you mentioned Hashimoto's, and I think some people are familiar with it, but for those who aren't, in a nutshell, what is Hashimoto's?
Yeah, so it's an autoimmune thyroid condition where the immune system mounts an attack on the thyroid. So it gets a little
Mhm.
confused and sees the thyroid as an enemy, and then kind of goes after it. And then as a result, the thyroid is compromised and injured and kind of leaks out. This is just a really
Yeah,
basic
yeah.
leaks out thyroid
Mhm.
and thyroid hormone. So then there's an excess in the body. So then you're running with too much. And then when it's time, when that kind of dissipates and it's time for the thyroid to pick back up production again, it's injured, right? And so
Mhm.
it can't keep up with demand. And so then it has a hard time putting out thyroid. So then you're under.
Mhm.
Then the cycle repeats itself. So you kind of swing back and forth between too much and too little. So you're like super anxious, aggravated, overly hyped up, or you're like completely devoid of energy and stressed and fatigued and struggling and feel like you're walking through mud to do anything throughout the day. So
Right.
like there's a tendency to swing back and forth. And the goal is to find steady state
Mhm.
and have like a balance to where your body's not attacking itself and also you have energy. So it's a little bit of a dance you do.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great way of explaining it. The thyroid, and I don't want to get sidetracked and nerding out on like, but I mean, it's kind of plays a role in being a part of like sort of the body's metabolic thermostat, if we call it that. And so it's interesting to think that, again, thinking about, you mentioned anxiety and how we sometimes want to attribute entirely psychological causes to experiencing anxiety, when in fact there may indeed be a physiological component to this. And I think why I want to shine a light on that is, again, from my own personal experience. I looked for sort of psychological reasons for the anxiety, and there were some. Obviously, I have PTSD and trauma in my background, so there were those. But there was actually a physical component to it as well. There's actually a part of my brain that was under functioning, and it was the right parietal system. And so I was struggling to feel my physical presence in my body. So that's the part of our brain that tells us, like, I'm holding my hand up here, and it detects your hand. So it would feel like I was floating on my body when I experienced anxiety. Um, so when you would, you said your anxiety was sort of like, where did Hashimoto's sort of come into the picture, connect, with regards to fertility? Was that a different time in your life, or did it end up sort of being around that same time?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it was at the same time. So when
Ooh,
we would I know when we
let's
really
just compound it a bit.
when we really got serious about fertility treatments, one
Mhm.
day my husband came home, and this is like a light at the end of the tunnel. So if you're experiencing something similar to what I described and you're feeling kind of alone in your fertility journey, there's a lot of research that shows that one spouse is generally a little bit more enthusiastic than another spouse. And
Mhm.
that eventually they probably get on the same page. So there came a day when my husband came home and said, "Hey, we're building the house for this urologist. And he said he works with patients who have infertility, but they haven't really found anything wrong with you. And so it could be me, right?" And I was like, I've been trying to tell you this for years, right? I mean,
Yeah,
like
right, right.
at first, like, after I got back off the floor from falling off my chair, I was like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
A, thanks for bringing this up. This is great. You've never brought this up before.
yeah.
And B, like, you're okay with this now? Like all of a sudden, because this guy that you're building a house for is a urologist, like all of a sudden it's fine. And
Mhm.
he was like, yeah, I think I should make an appointment with him. And I was like, Okay, great. That
Yeah,
sounds great. So and then we began, like, testing in earnest, and we
yeah.
had anyway, so as part of that testing, they did a few deeper tests, and they're like, "Oh, Mrs. Miller, you have Hashimoto's." And they're like,
Ah,
"But
okay.
it doesn't seem to be affecting any of your, reproductive hormones. It's just something we wanna keep tabs on because we want your autoantibody levels to be on point." So they
Right.
started giving me, Synthroid then. I didn't have any symptoms. I hadn't had any like, I didn't even know what it was, so I just started taking the Synthroid. The only indicator I had that time was like, autoantibodies at the level of like 1700 and something. So that's really high. That's like
Right.
sky high. And so, fast forward, we have our daughter with in vitro. It's amazing. She's incredible. We were just over the moon with her. And when she's about 4, we're like, okay, maybe we go back for those frozen embryos. So we go back for the frozen embryos. and I'm chemically pregnant. So I have, like a positive pregnancy test. I'm like, of course, I had felt really good about this cycle. This is going to go great. I can't believe, what incredible blessing this is. I feel so fortunate because so many people have, struggles with this. And then a few days later, I went back to test again, not thinking anything of it. Like you said, I was on the path, smooth sailing, like I had the road ready to go. And I got a call that afternoon and they said, Mrs. Miller, your hormone levels, your HCG isn't doubling. So we need you to stop taking your meds and we'll come in and kind of talk about, what's next. And I was like, what? Like, what,
what does this mean? Yeah.
And she was like, so yeah, you're not pregnant anymore. So go ahead and stop taking your progesterone, which is this huge, massive shot you have to stick in your hip.
Super fun.
Way fun. And it's someone else has to do it for you because you can't
it's a little awkward to
So anyway, I was like, well, I'm glad I don't have to take those anymore, but I was devastated. And again, I thought I had all these emotional coping skills that I'd amassed over those years of infertility, right? Like I can make it through anything.
Right.
It knocked me flat, like physically, emotionally, mentally. I just went into a dive. And so Hashimoto's, any autoimmune condition, stress can throw a flare, right? And so I took I would take my daughter to preschool and I would feel like I was about to fall asleep driving home from preschool. I mean, I had just woke up, right? It was
right.
I had nothing. And I think it was compounded by some other things going on at the time. Like I had a business I was helping to work on. I was just not taking great care of myself because I'd always taken for granted that my body would just work.
Right. Yeah. That's a really, I was going to say, just shine a light on that phrase too, taking for granted that my body will always work. And I think that's something that many people, myself included, have found ourselves in that space. I'll take everything else first.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So I just had to spend a couple of years digging myself out. Like I owed my body big because I hadn't been taking care of it. And so I started changing the way that I was eating, changing the way I was caring for myself. It was a longer road to all the information that I needed, and I had to find the right doctors to help, and that was frustrating and hard. And again, I felt like, isn't this enough? Like, haven't I already? I mean,
yeah. How am I going to get through this?
Yeah.
I often think though we have to be brought to the end of ourselves before we'll ask for help.
I love that. Yeah.
And so you start digging yourself out, and such a small little phrase that takes 2 seconds to say, but underneath that there's a lot. What does that look like, digging yourself out? Because you feel like you're drowning. There's just you're swimming in overwhelming emotion, and now you also run into this sort of conflicting feeling. I thought I had all these tools, and it turns out they're still inadequate.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really humbling. And I tried to do the cerebral thing through grief, it's fine. I know sometimes this happens.
You're thinking of the 6 steps of grief, and we go through this.
Right, exactly, this is where I'm at. Yeah, totally. What it looked like at first was me just putting one foot in front of the other and trying to pick up the laundry basket again. I mean, she called me. I was I was holding a laundry basket. I went outside and told my daughter, and then from there was numb for a while. So it took a bit, you know what I mean? It took a bit before that even diggings could start to happen because it just felt, I was in such shock. And this is where too, the faith component had served me well for my whole life. And I felt like at this juncture, it betrayed me because I felt good about it. I had felt faith and confidence, and there had been some really specific experiences that I had that felt like signs from the universe that everything was going to be fine and I didn't need to worry because I had worried so much on the first one, nervous and not sure. And the interpretation I made was oh, this is so I don't have to worry this time and I can just enjoy it and it's going to go smoothly. And so it felt like the rug got ripped out from under me, and my faith betrayed me too. And so that piece took a bit to grapple with. And I've always loved the scripture in the Bible in Isaiah where it says, you'll have beauty for ashes. And there's a whole bunch of other dichotomies there that he goes through, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness and the oil. Anyway, so I had to really decide if I believed that. And those are 4 teachings for my whole life. And I was at the point where I was if this is what that's going to get me, then maybe I don't want to believe that, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? And I think anybody who practices or follows any kind of faith, it's like you actually have to go through this journey where it is tested to the utmost, again, brought to the end of ourself, and almost like you rebuild it. Because I mean, I was raised with this, but I recognize my parents are very good about this too, help me understand like this is something that I have to decide for myself, even though they would choose it for me if they could. But they're wise enough to recognize we can't choose this for you. This is an individual thing for you. So we will guide you in the best way that we know, but ultimately this is something you have to do. And then you look back and I go like, that's what these experiences are actually about. It's like, you almost have to get it right to the bottom to realize, okay, like I'm still not out of reach, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the valley of the shadow of death, for sure. And that's where so I was like, "Okay, I am looking at a big pile of ashes right
Hmm.
now." Like, it felt like it all burned to the ground. I mean, I just didn't even it was so hard because physically, I was always been super active. Like, mental health had always been something that I was really, like, felt like was a strength or something that I had some experience and wisdom in, and all of it, just decimated with one phone call. And so for the first thing I had to do was get my hope back online, like believing
Hmm.
it was possible to do something different, believing it was possible to come back from that. So
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
what digging out looked like at first, was like finding my hope. And then after that, it looked like finding support. So then once I found enough hope to like believe it was possible, I started looking for a doctor who could help. I went to I don't know how many. I switched family practice doctors. I was like, look, I did in vitro. My digestion was like off the rails after that. I have zero energy. My Synthroid dose changed around this time. I think all these things are related. I need you to help me figure out how. And I had people say I brought in like this one sheet where I typed it all out. And I'm like, I know there's like some common thread here.
There's
I
a
just
thread here.
can't,
Yeah.
I don't have the training to know? And I had one doctor tell me, Mrs. Miller, you are a really great historian, but these things have nothing to do with each other. Just keep. And
Oof.
so, like, you can imagine, like, it took everything in me, right, to just be like, "There's a way out. I can do this." And then have someone in
Yeah.
a position of authority, like, who I trust, say,
Mm-mm-mm.
"You're crazy." Like, just the
Essentially. Yeah. And that in itself, I mean, of course, my brain goes, "Huh, why did this person do that?" And I think sometimes when we're in a position of sort of professional competence where people put their trust in us and we don't have an answer, it's kind of a way out to spare our ego,
Mm.
rather than to say, you know what, you might be onto something here, but this is outside of like this goes beyond my expertise. And I would like to think, of course, it's easy in hindsight for me to say this, but I would like to think I would at least, and I mean, I've done this with clients where I go, this is outside of my scope of expertise. I have the strongest desire in the world to help you, but we're now getting beyond what I'm capable of helping you with. And so I want to support you in the best way possible in getting the help you need, but I also have to acknowledge my limitations. And so you talk about like abundance and scarcity. I think there's a really interesting sort of mindset piece in here when we realize that like me recognizing the limitations of my abilities doesn't necessarily rob me of business or the ability to help others. So that was a really interesting sort of sidebar there.
I love that. Yeah, and it's such a good point because, I think we do have that tendency, yeah, to feel like if we refer out or if we need to be able to manage everything. And I think we do it in a lot of areas of our lives, but just like finding the right support in any of those
Mhm.
moments can help, like, just make the team a little bigger.
Yeah, yeah. So I love that. So get my hope back online. That was the first one. I wrote that phrase down. I love that. And then get support. The
Yeah.
idea that we have to do this by ourselves is like the biggest fallacy that
Yeah.
I think has ever been foisted on humanity, that somehow we are supposed to do this by ourselves when we are interconnected. Like there's no escaping that. We need each other. We need support. We need community, and we need a team on our side. And I say to so many of my clients, I'm like, get all the help you can. I'm going to give you the best that I have. I'm going to give you the best that I can to support you in this. But everybody that you can recruit into helping you is so important, because this is a real challenge to try to do this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and, like I said before, I'm the oldest of 5. I'm a DIY,
Mm.
like, I love DIY anything. And, I'm trying to, like, fix my rower right now. I love
Yeah,
trying
yeah. Of course. Yeah.
so I did, like, think, "Okay, there's probably some stuff I can do here." But what was interesting was that it took I eventually made it to another doctor. I realized I wasn't in the right offices. That's what I realized. Like, I was
Mm,
looking
mm,
around,
mm.
he's just not practicing the kind of medicine that I want. And I need to find someone who is practicing the kind of medicine I want, which is a little bit more involvement by me and communication. Like that's the kind of
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I want.
Yeah.
And so I found a lady who did. And the first thing she said, like, so I listed off my stuff and I was kind of hesitant because by that time I'd recited it several times to no avail.
Right.
Nobody was in my like court in terms of saying, yes, this is something I can help you with. And so I find her and I'm like, hey, here's what I think. I think maybe all these things are related. I'm not as
Yeah. Yeah.
confident.
Yeah.
She was like, of course they're related. And I was like, wait, what? She was like,
Yeah.
she like gets out her whiteboard and starts drawing. And I was like, this is my office. This is the doctor.
Yeah.
And it was so empowering to just be heard in that moment, right? And for her to say, well, yeah, you know your body best. And when we said, I was like, well, so we made a plan and it had a lot to do. My blood sugar levels were super high. I was pre-diabetic. I mean, it was bad at that point. And so we made a plan to get my blood sugar back in check first. That was our first step. And I was like, well, how are we going to know if this is working? And she was like, you're going to listen to your body? And I was like, wait, what? We're not going to do like a bunch of tests, or you're not the one deciding if it's working? And she was like, no, it's your body.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa. I mean,
and this is a medical doctor?
Yeah, she was a thyroidologist. So she specifically focused on thyroids. But no doctor had at that point, I was 34, had ever said that to me, right? Ever.
Any chance? Like, I want to interview her.
Yeah. Let me see if I can put you in touch.
That'd be amazing.
But yeah. She was so incredible for me in terms of like trusting myself and believing that there was a way out. And so I used her as a resource. So she put me on this path for blood sugar support, and I had to go be like eating only vegetable and meat for 6 weeks. And then we were going to check it. But almost immediately I started to notice a huge difference. And I was like, yeah, I eat some sugar, but I was healthy. I mean, I was doing triathlons. It wasn't like I was, like sitting on the bag,
Right.
bag of Cheetos. I had a pretty healthy diet, but she was like, here are some places where there's some gaps. Can you see how your blood sugar is tanking, then, coming back up quickly, and your body can't accommodate those kind of spikes? And I was like, oh, well, that makes sense,
And you kind of just casually remark that you're doing triathlons. And I think, of course, about what are the recovery demands placed in the body by going through that level of training to be able to do those as well. Because, I mean, look, triathlons are amazing, but like that's actually asking a lot from your body to recover from.
Yeah. Oh, and they were sprint. Let's be clear.
Yeah.
There was no Ironman. But yeah, no, it was. And that's, at the time when things were falling apart, I was staying up late. I loved sewing and I was like making a Halloween costume for my daughter and doing all these things I dreamed of doing all these years, and like reading books and going out with friends and, volunteering places. And I was just doing so many things that I thought, well, everyone just does those things and stays up till 2 a.m. and then goes for a run with their friends the next day. Right. Like it wasn't out of the norm for the people I hung around. And so I just thought, like, why is everyone else's body able to do that? And this thing's all broken,
Right.
But it is like I'm so intentional now. Like when I'm asking something of my body, to support it in the ways that it needs support,
Yeah. What a great way to put it. I was having a conversation with a client earlier today, and we were having like an uncomfortable conversation, very supportive, but we had to talk about something really uncomfortable. And that was the reality of the future that was waiting for her if this pattern of behavior continued. And we had, we were really doing some digging, and it was, and it just came out, it was like, this is the one body you get. There isn't another one waiting for you. And I think one of the biggest challenges we might encounter is to have that. So like, we need to have this uncomfortable conversation and not like bury our head and ignore the reality of what is taking place right now. So I'm going to do the best that I can to create a supportive space for you, but we have to talk about this uncomfortable reality. Yeah. And, I think you've had to have some of those, actually a lot of those conversations, and maybe with yourself and with others, where it's like, we need to talk about the uncomfortable reality of this situation. And I think it's uncomfortable again, because it almost goes back to a little bit of this reality versus expectation. We want to have hope. And I think hope is so important in life. But sometimes our hope looks like I ride a unicorn up the rainbow to the clouds. And, But, if we say, like, maybe hope looks a little bit different. So, after you've been through all of these massive, like, struggles and, you know, what does hope look like, and how does maybe your hope look different than it might have for, like, 23-year-old Lindsay coming out of university kind of thing?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. I think my hope has a little bit more of like an active component for sure. I think that Lindsay thought that things would just like come together, and sometimes they do, right? There's some beautiful synchronicities in life, and I love that when that happens. And also, like bringing hope into reality takes a whole lot of hard work.
Yeah, yeah,
So I would tell her just to like buckle up and be ready to work and like put your actions into that hope in a way that makes it your reality. And then I think it's also changed in just that, like, I can really honor the beauty that comes from the ashes. Um,
yeah, yeah.
after I was feeling better, and I was feeling like better actually than I ever had felt physically in my body after navigating that stretch with Hashimoto's and the interventions and like diet and lifestyle changes that I made. Um, my husband and I, again, it was one of those moments where we were like, okay, what are some things we've said we've always wanted to do? Because I'm not taking one more day in this body for granted. And so
Mhm.
we went to Guatemala, and we'd always wanted to go there. And we started doing humanitarian work.
Yeah.
And it was so meaningful to me. And we were one day hiking up this volcano, and the guide was, taking us, and we had our daughter, and she was on horseback, and it was idyllic. It was just gorgeous with green everywhere. It just felt like the thick of, the jungle. And we're walking up the volcano, and the guide said, "Hey, I know you're appreciating this ride. I just remember we're on an active volcano." And he's like, "And actually, this thing erupted just 5 years ago. And everything that you see now had been decimated. There was nothing. It was covered in ash.
Wow. Yeah.
Everything here had died." And I looked at it, and it just, like, was so profound to me to be, like, walking through this gorgeous flower-filled jungle with, like, birds and animals and all the things. It was, by all accounts, thriving. And for him
Right.
to have said 5 years ago, this was covered in ash, like, a huge eruption happened, this is covered in ash, and, like, the beauty actually came from that because the ash is the thing that promotes the regrowth.
Right. It's yeah, very mineral rich, and oh man. Yeah, what a beautiful experience to have.
Yeah.
And of course, particularly meaningful for you because of course your experience and reading of that scripture and grappling with it and what it means and whether or not you want to believe it. And you know, that's incredible. And
Yeah.
so
Like what hope is to me now. Like if you
yeah,
see ashes, you're like, "Oh my gosh, something incredible is on the way." If you
mm,
told me that before, I would have been really scared of the ashes.
right.
But now
Yeah.
I'm like, Just wait."
Yeah. So as we sort of bring this to a close, I'm really like grateful for you for your willingness to share, be vulnerable, share your story. I'm just thinking, if there's people out there, let's say they're in like a really difficult spot right now. You were in that place where it felt like your body was breaking down. It felt like you had zero energy for anything. And part of the advice you gave was like, be prepared to put in some hard work in order to bring hope to life. And I love that. But I think we also want to frame it in a way, well, what does hard work look for someone who is just exhausted and feels like their body's breaking down? What might that look like just to help them shape their expectation in this particular circumstance?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So the first thing that looked like was going to bed.
Mhm.
Like saying, "No, I'm not gonna stay up." And like my husband, we would
Right.
watch TV at night or whatever. Like I'd get my daughter to bed and I would go to bed. So like that's probably that was the first that was hard work. It was hard work to say no and change my lifestyle. That was
Right.
hard.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
hard work to like cut up vegetables. And I had been cooking pretty healthy, but I was, straight up vegetables and meat at that point. And so it was hard to learn new recipes, but I
Mm.
could sit on the couch and look on my iPad and find a couple recipes and make a meal plan. And
Mhm.
that was hard work,
Yeah.
and like you don't have anything and then you have to spend all your time looking at the food, making the food or preparing for the food. Like that's what it took for me for a number of years to get to a place where um, it felt more natural. Now I can do that without even thinking about it, right? Like it's normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
spending like, and so I think a lot of the hard work component is like focusing your energy on the thing that's going to have the biggest impact, and finding someone to help you, like you, who can say, okay, here's, based on what you're telling me, here's the biggest impact place. Like the little energy that you have, let's invest it here because that's going to compound and give us a little more energy, right? Like the sleep gave me a little more energy to meal plan. The meal planning gave me a little more energy to make the food. Making the food gave me a little bit more energy to like be able to do some yoga. Doing yoga gave me energy to play with my kid. I mean, I just had small and steady steps, but it felt like a lot because I was climbing a mountain, right?
Yeah.
My level of functionality was so far from what I was accustomed to in all regards, mentally, physically, and emotionally, spiritually, that I was just like, it feels like it's too far to go, right? But just like hiking that volcano, like that lived experience of having to just take one step after another to get myself to a place where like I could move, I could play, I could just get a little bit of fun back in my world. Then it snowballed, and then my Thyroid levels were going down. And like I took those auto antibodies from 1700 to like 17.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was like not overnight, like it was, but it was like one steady decision at a time that felt like a whole lot of hard work.
Yeah. And I think that, maybe another conversation, but it speaks to the power of nutrition and how it has, what we put into our body and the ability it has to impact it. And that in itself is a really difficult thing to do when we consider even how our society is structured to get us, like, to feed us garbage food, to move against the resistance of that. But to do it because it was what was necessary. And I really appreciate how you framed that. Just, going to bed and getting sleep gave you energy to do one more thing, and that little thing gave you a little bit more energy. And it is hard, but I love hard work kind of being framed that way, because we often glorify like sort of the hustle culture and even like the burnout culture and that kind of thing. And it's like, no, we want to reframe what that looks like. It's still going to be difficult, it's still going to be challenging, but this doesn't mean you try and jam the pedal to the metal every single day. It's you do the thing. It's almost like work smarter, not harder,
Yeah, totally. Well, and the thing is I remember, and people say this about yoga a lot and mindfulness for that matter, but like, wait, it could be easy and helpful. Just like we have this misconception that by like beating ourselves up, we will get stronger and heal. And there's, places where that's the case. But I think when we take such good and gentle care of ourselves, like that's the place where we get stronger and heal.
Yeah. Beating ourselves up to try and get stronger to heal. It's like, I'm going to add to the damage that's being done. Yeah. Yeah. So to close it out then, you've got so much wisdom to share. And I would just remark that anybody, there's great value in both checking out Lindsay, her Stress Nanny podcast. Also, we had a really brilliant chat on Wellness Unfiltered. I should probably, like, maybe in the comments after this, I'm going to go and find like the link to that Wellness Unfiltered episode, because there was so much gold in there, just in terms of like, we didn't tap into your brilliance around working with children. But I'd like people to be able to hear some of that as well, because all of this that you've been through has led you to this place where you're able to do this remarkable work with children. And I'm obviously, I'm a big fan of your work. That's why I keep asking you to come back for, some kind of podcast conversation. But now knowing the backstory that got you to that place, just makes it all the more remarkable. So, I mean, it's sharing this space with you. And I'd just like to give you an opportunity to kind of, one, let people know where they can find you, and then close it out with some words of wisdom.
Well, thank you. And thanks again for the invite. I always love talking to you, and I learned so much from our calls and your work. It's a gift to know you, John. I think one of the reasons that I do what I do today is because I had to navigate all those things and try to explain them to my 3-year-old in a way that felt empowering and not victim. And it was really hard. It was really hard. Like, Mom, why can't you get up today? Like, why can't you pick me up? Why can't, like, what's wrong, Mom? And I knew this would color. I knew all of those things would color her world when she was little. And that, like, it was so hard for me to be navigating those experiences, knowing that they were coming during these years that were so formative for her. And so I was determined at that time that I would build resilience in her as a result of like the resilience I had to build in myself, and that it wouldn't be something that was apart from our life, right? But I'd find a way to talk with her about big things in a way that made sense to her, in a way she could understand. So when we're talking like in my work where we talk about these simple tools, it's because I needed them, right?
Right. Yeah.
I had to have them because I didn't want her to grow up feeling at the mercy of life.
Yeah.
And so I had to figure out how to frame life in a way that she felt empowered. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about sharing mindfulness and stress resilience with families is because, no matter where we're at or what we're facing, our families are going to face stress, right? There are going to be things unexpected, things that come as a result of our choices and things that come, that we have no control over. And the important thing is to be able to navigate them in orient ourselves toward growth, right? And to believe and have hope that good can come from the struggle. Yeah. And it was really hard for me to believe that for a lot of years. And I've seen it play out in my life in really incredible ways. And like that volcano story, it's written in me, in experience. I can't help but smile whenever I think of it because I've lived that moment. Like I've lived that eruption and the regrowth, and it's incredible. And so if I can offer support to anyone on that path, I would love to do it because I know it's possible. And it's going to look different for each of us. What our volcano looks like after the eruption, it's going to look different, but there's the potential for beauty there. And if I can help parents and kids to believe it and then help them have tools to achieve it and, just access it, then it makes the experiences that I've had that much more meaningful. Because remember how I said, someday I could help someone as a result of this. If I can help someone as a result of this, I'm here for it.
Well, and just thinking about extending this sort of metaphor here, the work that you're doing with other people is not just helping you with this regrowth. It's you're helping the entire sort of landscape that you've impacted to grow into something beautiful. So your work extends far beyond just, your own immediate circle here. And I think it's really wonderful that we don't get to see the ripple effect, because otherwise we'd probably get really big heads. But because it's not really about us, it's not really, it really isn't. And, but the work that you're doing, I just picture that volcano grew, but that spreads, that spreads beyond maybe even just the sort of the base of that volcano and out. And so I think, there's just so much amazing work that you're doing, and it's so needed in this space, which is again why I'm really happy to use whatever platform I have to promote what you do, because I think people just benefit from your willingness to be in this place and be that support for people. So thank you again.
I appreciate it, John.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become, and I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.